Picture yourself standing inside the Grand Cathedral of Cambrai during the 15th century. You're enveloped by magnificent Gothic stonework, massive columns climbing up to vaulted ceilings that seem to stretch all the way to the sky. And then the music softly fills the air. Four voices weave together in intricate patterns, filling the vast space with a rich tapestry of sound. The stone architecture gently captures each note, preserving it and allowing it to multiply, creating layer upon layer of harmony. This isn't just music for worship. It's a powerful expression of cultural pride, highlighting Burgundy's status as Europe's vibrant cultural hub. Welcome back to the I Take History with My Coffee podcast, where we explore history in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The composer behind that sound? Guillaume du Fay, born around 1397 in the Burgundian Low Countries, and who died in 1474, just 3 years before the Burgundian state collapsed at the Battle of Nancy. His career spanned the period when Burgundy transformed from a collection of territories into Europe's most magnificent court. But du Fay wasn't merely continuing medieval traditions. He and his Burgundian contemporaries were creating something genuinely new. This musical language balanced the mathematical complexity inherited from medieval French composers with a new emphasis on harmonic beauty and expressive clarity. They bridged medieval and Renaissance music and made the Low Countries the place everyone looked to for musical innovation. To grasp du Fay's importance, we must see what made Burgundy special. Philip the Good and Charles the Bold ruled wealthy, urbanized areas from Dijon to the North Sea. Flemish cities produced textiles for Europe's elite, and banking and trade brought wealth. But wealth alone doesn't ensure cultural dominance. What made Burgundy different was the deliberate fusion of that wealth with political ambition and institutional sophistication. The Burgundian dukes weren't sovereigns. They were vassals of both the French king and the Holy Roman Emperor. They ruled a patchwork of territories without political unity. So they built their legitimacy another way, through magnificence, spectacle, and culture. Music was central to that project, not as background, but as a form of diplomacy and sophistication that gained respect across Europe. The Burgundian court had elaborate musical establishments, and cathedral cities like Cambrai, Bruges, and Antwerp trained the finest musicians. These musicians became Europe's most sought-after exports. This convergence of resources, ambition, and institutional capacity created the conditions for genuine musical innovation. Du Fay was the figure who seized that opportunity most fully. Guillaume du Fay's career perfectly illustrates how the system worked. Born around 1397 near Brussels, he entered the cathedral's choir school at Cambrai as a young boy. This wasn't just singing lessons. Cathedral schools like Cambrai taught music theory, composition, and the intricate art of polyphonic singing. Music with multiple independent voices weaving together. They produced professionals. and those professionals were internationally mobile. Du Fay didn't stay in the Low Countries. In the 1420s, he served the Malatesta family in northern Italy. Then he joined the papal choir in Rome, singing for the Pope himself from 1428 to 1433. Consider what this means. A musician trained in the Burgundian Low Countries was now considered worthy of serving the most prestigious patron in Christendom. This Italian experience was formative. Du Fay encountered Italian musical styles, humanist intellectual culture, and diverse performance traditions. He absorbed these influences while maintaining his grounding in Franco-Flemish polyphony. This cosmopolitanism, this ability to synthesize Northern and Southern European traditions, became characteristic of the Burgundian school. The pattern persisted throughout his career. He served the Duke of Savoy and received commissions from Italian princes. He also corresponded with patrons across Europe. Importantly, he held church benefices that offered a stable income and enabled him to serve secular patrons. For example, a canon position at Cambrai Cathedral paid well and did not require constant residence. This church-centered system was the foundation that kept the entire structure functioning. Du Fay finally returned to Cambrai in the 1440s, not in retirement, but as an elder statesman. He remained there until he died in 1474, continuing to compose, accept commissions, and mentor younger musicians. His house stood near the cathedral, and when he died, he left instructions that Ave Regina Caelorum, the piece we heard at the opening, be sung at his deathbed. This mobility, this international reputation, this is what Burgundian musical training produced. When people across Europe sought the best musicians, they looked to the Low Countries. Before we dive into specific pieces, we need to understand what made Du Fay and his Burgundian contemporaries distinctive. What were they doing that earlier composers weren't? Medieval music, especially the French Ars Nova of the 14th century, reached high rhythmic and mathematical complexity. Composers like Guillaume du Fay crafted intricate structures, focused more on intellectual design than on immediate sonic beauty. Their complex rules often produced harmonies that sound harsh today. Du Fay's generation brought a fresh perspective. While they kept the intricate structures and mathematical complexity, they also prioritized what we now call harmonic euphony. This means they focused on pleasing consonant harmonies, smooth voice leading, and clear harmonic directions and resolutions. When you listen to Du Fay's music, you'll notice it feels more accessible and immediately beautiful, more inviting than most 14th century polyphony. Du Fay and his friends experimented with new ways to manage dissonance, figuring out when and how voices could clash before settling into harmony. They discovered fresh harmonic possibilities with thirds and sixths, intervals that medieval theorists had once thought imperfect, but which Du Fay's era embraced as key to their musical style. These thirds and sixths give Renaissance music that warm, rich sound. They also expanded the range and texture of polyphonic writing. 4 voices became standard rather than 3. The ranges of those voices expanded, higher sopranos and lower basses. This created richer, fuller textures, and allowed for more varied compositional possibilities. Importantly, they integrated their music in innovative ways. Previously, composers had composed separate movements or sections. Du Fay introduced the cyclic mass, in which a shared musical theme connects all 5 movements of the ordinary of the Mass. This approach established a large-scale structural unity that reflected the grandeur of Burgundian court culture. So when we listen to Du Fay, we hear a genuinely transitional figure, someone who maintains medieval structural sophistication while pioneering the harmonic language and expressive priorities that would define the Renaissance. Imagine stepping into Florence on March 25th, 1436, during the joyful celebration of the Feast of the Annunciation. After decades of dedicated work, Filippo Brunelleschi's magnificent dome now crowns the Florence Cathedral, standing as an awe-inspiring marvel, the largest dome built since ancient times. Even Pope Eugenius IV is present to consecrate this grand achievement. The cathedral is brimming with European nobility and church officials, all gathered to witness a moment that showcases Florence's impressive strength and proud identity. It's truly a stunning display of the city's power, ambition, and cultural brilliance. They've commissioned Guillaume du Fay to compose the music for the ceremony. The piece, Nuper Rosarum Flores, or Recently Roses, is a motet celebrating the Virgin Mary, the cathedral, the Pope, and the city itself. Let me take a moment to clarify what a motet is, as you'll encounter this term frequently when exploring medieval and Renaissance music. A motet is a mainly polyphonic choral piece based on sacred texts, typically in Latin, created for special occasions rather than everyday church services. Consider it ceremonial music, often commissioned for significant events, like a cathedral consecration. Nuper Rosarum Flores beautifully highlights Du Fay's talent for blending medieval and Renaissance styles. The piece employs isorhythm, a medieval technique where rhythmic patterns repeat with mathematical precision, creating a sense of architectural harmony in the music. Some scholars believe Du Fay intentionally designed these proportions to reflect Brunelleschi's iconic dome. This exemplifies the medieval tradition of viewing music as a form of mathematical and geometric expression, music as an audible reflection of precise design. Listen to the actual harmonies, the way the 4 voices blend and interact, and you'll notice something quite different from the 14th century isorhythmic motets. The sound is warmer and richer, with thirds and sixths adding delightful consonances. Dissonances resolve gently, creating a gentle flow. There's a lovely sense of harmonic movement, with phrases that seem to breathe and flow naturally. This is the new Burgundian style, where structural sophistication beautifully enhances sonic beauty. The text is multi-layered, praising the Virgin Mary. Quote, recently roses came, gifts from the Pope, end quote, where roses symbolize the Pope, his gift to Florence and the cathedral, This layered meaning reflects both textual and musical sophistication, creating multiple interpretations. Du Fay skillfully uses an old isorhythmic technique, seen as archaic by the 1430s, to serve new expressive purposes. He demonstrates mastery of complex medieval forms while transforming them, blending conservatism and innovation, ideal for a papal ceremony honoring tradition and achievement. And here's what matters: a Burgundian composer trained at Cambrai Cathedral is representing papal prestige at a Florentine civic celebration. Music as international currency. The motet itself became famous, copied and studied throughout Europe. It showed the Burgundian composers had mastered the most prestigious forms of sacred music while pushing those forms into new expressive directions. Now shift to an entirely different musical world, the chanson. The piece is Sur la face I pâle, If My Face is Pale, composed by Du Fay, probably in the 1430s. A chanson is a secular song, usually in French, typically for three voices. The text is classic courtly love poetry. Quote, If my face is pale, the cause is love. This is the harm that makes me so. It is true, and one can prove it, that on earth there is no more beautiful. End quote. Elevated and refined, it expresses idealized emotion within strict artistic conventions. Du Fay's chansons display the same harmonic sophistication as his sacred music. Earlier 14th century chansons, like those of Guillaume du Fay, often featured a single main melody supported by two instrumental lines, creating a somewhat angular dissonant texture. Du Fay's generation composed chansons in which all three voices sang texts, interacted in more genuine polyphonic equality, and emphasized the smooth thirds and sixths we discussed earlier. What's fascinating about Sur la face I pâle is how memorable the melody is. That top voice carries a distinctive, singable, elegant tune, qualities that make it stick in listeners' memories. And Du Fay knew this, because later he would remarkably exploit that memorability. About 20 years after composing the chanson, likely in the 1450s, Du Fay used the melody as the foundation for an entire Mass setting, the Missa sur la face I pâle. This notable work is one of the first complete cyclic Masses, featuring all five movements, Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei, connected by the same cantus firmus, with the borrowed melody weaving through the entire piece. The compositional technique, known as cantus firmus, took a pre-existing melody and used it as the structural foundation of a new composition. The technique wasn't new, but applying it systematically across all five movements of the Mass to create large-scale unity was innovative. Du Fay was among the first to do so consistently. Here's a simple way to understand it. Du Fay takes the chanson melody and places it in the tenor voice of the Mass, but with a dramatic transformation. The notes remain the same, but are beautifully stretched out, each one lasting much longer than in the original song. It's slowed down so much that it might not even be immediately recognizable as the same tune. At the same time, three other voices weave their own independent polyphony around this elongated melody, creating a rich four-voice sacred music that feels completely different from the original courtly love song. Think about the compositional achievement here. You're creating five separate movements, each with different texts, lengths, and liturgical functions. Yet all five are unified by this hidden thread. This chanson melody appears in each movement, sometimes once, sometimes multiple times, creating coherence across what might be 20 minutes of music. This cyclic approach became the standard for sacred composition for the next century, with composers like Achenheim and Palestrina writing cyclic masses. It's one of du Fay's key innovations, reflecting the blending of sacred and secular music in Burgundian culture by using the same material and techniques across different social roles. We've treated sacred and secular music as separate, but they existed in a dynamic relationship. The same composers worked in both spheres, the same musical techniques, innovations in harmony, voice leading, and structural unity flowed between them. Yet the performance contexts were genuinely different, and understanding those differences helps us grasp the full scope of Burgundian musical culture. Cathedral acoustics played a crucial role in shaping sacred music. The stone structures, vaulted ceilings, and echoes that lasted several seconds all influenced that sound. As a result, composers tended to write with slower tempos, carefully space the voices, and use long notes. This created a majestic and immersive atmosphere, evoking a sense of the sacred. You can notice this in Nuper Rosarum Flores. The music proceeds deliberately, giving each tone room to resonate fully within the space. Brief distances may occur, but the reverberation seamlessly integrates them into the overall sound before the harmony is resolved. The Cambrai Cathedral, where du Fay worked, was a Gothic building with excellent acoustics. Although demolished in the 1790s during the French Revolution, it is described in surviving accounts. Its high vaulted ceilings, stone pillars, and long nave created multiple reflecting surfaces, allowing sound to develop and decay gradually. Polyphonic music in this space became nearly three-dimensional, with voices entering at different times and overlapping in reverberation. Courtly chambers were acoustically distinct. Tapestries absorbed sound. Wood furnishings, lower ceilings, and smaller spaces. All of this meant shorter reverberation time. This allowed quicker tempos, more intricate rhythms, and more intimate expression. The chanson Sur la face I parle moves at a livelier pace and features greater rhythmic variety because the acoustic space allows for clearer detail. You can hear individual words, appreciate subtle rhythmic games between the voices, and follow the interplay in ways that would blur in a cathedral's reverberation. The Burgundian court itself was mobile, moving from residences in Dijon, Brussels, Bruges, and Lille. Each location had chambers suitable for musical performance. However, these weren't purpose-built concert halls, but living spaces adapted for entertainment. The intimacy mattered. You might have 20 or 30 people present, not hundreds. The musicians might be just a few feet from the listeners. Performers themselves also varied. Cathedral choirs consisted of professional musicians hired by affluent institutions. At Cambrai, the cathedral's choir comprised about 12 to 16 singers, sufficient for four-part polyphony, though often with fewer voices. All members were male, as women were barred from church choirs. These were skilled professionals, capable of sight-reading complex polyphonic music. Secular music used smaller ensembles. Three voices for a chanson like Cela face I parle, perhaps three skilled singers, or voices combined with instruments such as lutes or vielles. The sources aren't always clear about instrumentation. Sometimes all voices sang the text. Sometimes one or two voices were played on instruments. There's evidence that at sophisticated courts like Burgundy's, women sometimes participated in secular music making, though the documentation is spotty. The temporal dimensions also differed. Sacred music was tied to the liturgical calendar, specific feast days and ceremonial occasions. Nuperosarum Flores was composed for one specific moment, the consecration of Florence Cathedral on the Feast of the Annunciation in 1436. After that event, the motet might be performed again, but its meaning remained forever tied to the Florentine ceremony. Sacred music operated in ritual time. Secular music was flexible, formed for social occasions and receptions, and used in various ways. Chansons like Cela face I parle were frequently played at various courts, serving as entertainment, background music, or showcases of musical skill, depending on the event. The audience experience was fundamentally different. In a cathedral, attendees were part of a congregation, experiencing music within a liturgical setting, prayers, readings, and ritual actions. It contributed to the atmosphere, heightened the sacredness of the space and ceremony. Many audience members likely couldn't follow the individual voices or grasp the compositional craftsmanship. That was acceptable, as the music's purpose was fulfilled through its powerful presence. In a courtly chamber, you were an attentive listener, expected to appreciate musical nuance. You understood the poetic lyrics, observed the formal structure, and noticed instances where voices imitated or formed harmonious chords. Afterward, you might discuss the piece, its strengths, craftsmanship, and its relationship to other recent chansons. Active listening and informed judgment were key to showcasing your sophistication. Together, these two traditions represented the full scope of Burgundian musical achievement. Sacred music demonstrated institutional power and international prestige, while secular music fostered courtly culture and social cohesion. Both required sophisticated training, commanded respect, and demonstrated that Burgundy had achieved cultural dominance through musical excellence. Guillaume du Fay died in 1474, 3 years before the Burgundian state collapsed at Nancy. Yet the musical culture he helped create didn't end with him. The next generation of composers, Achingham, Busnoy, and especially Jacquin des Prez, shared a common background rooted in the rich Low Countries tradition. Building upon du Fay's groundbreaking work, they focused on creating harmoniously beautiful music, using the cyclic mass structure and blending the intricate polyphony of the North with the melodic elegance of Italy. The Franco-Flemish style they pioneered became a defining influence on European music. lasting strong into the 16th century. The institutional infrastructure remained. The cathedral schools at Cambrai, Bruges, Antwerp, and Ghent continued training musicians. The tradition of international mobility persisted. Flemish musicians served Italian courts, French royal chapels, and Spanish cathedrals. For more than a century after Du Fay's death, Flemish musician remained synonymous with the highest level of musical accomplishment. When the Burgundian territories passed to the Habsburgs in 1477, the entire cultural infrastructure came with them. Maximilian didn't just acquire wealthy cities and commercial networks. He inherited a musical culture that his descendants would continue to exploit for generations. When you read about Flemish musicians at Spanish Habsburg courts in the 16th century, you're reading about people drawing on this tradition, this reputation, and the system of training and prestige that Du Fay's generation established. Understanding Guillaume du Fay helps us see why the Low Countries mattered beyond their economic and political value. This region had transformed cultural production into a strategic advantage. Music wasn't decoration. It was a proof of sophistication, a source of international prestige, and evidence of the civilization that wealth and institutions could create. Du Fay's achievement was fundamentally about innovation within tradition. He preserved the structural sophistication of medieval music while pioneering a new harmonic language that emphasized beauty, clarity, and expressive power. That balance, intellectually impressive yet immediately appealing, defines the Burgundian contribution to European music. His career exemplified the system at its height, moving between Cambrai and Rome, between papal service and secular courts, and between the ceremonial grandeur of Nupa Rosarum Flores and the courtly intimacy of Sur la face papal. His innovations, particularly the cyclic mass set to secular melodies, became the foundation for European musical development into the next century. When we talk about the Burgundian Golden Age, we usually think of Jean van Eyck's paintings or the magnificence of the ducal court. But Guillaume du Fay's music is just as central to that story. It's the sound of a culture at the height of its creative power, a culture that made the Low Countries the place everyone looked to for musical excellence. That legacy outlasted the Burgundian state itself, shaping European music for generations. That's the sound, Burgundian power. But Burgundian cultural dominance wasn't just about what you could hear or see. It was also about what you could read and think. Next time, we'll examine how this culture of institutional wealth and intellectual refinement gave rise to Erasmus of Rotterdam, whose ideas would transform European thinking as significantly as Du Fay's music had revolutionized European sound. As always, maps and other supporting resources for all episodes are listed in the episode description. In the meantime, for more historical content, please visit the I Take History with My Coffee blog at itakehistory.com. Become a free or paid subscriber on Substack and get related historical content delivered to your inbox. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Feedback and comments are welcome at itakehistory@gmail.com, or you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You can also help support this podcast by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/itakehistory. You know anyone else would enjoy this podcast, please let them know. And thanks for listening.